You're listening to the Jewish Entrepreneur Podcast with Debbie Sasson, episode 96. Welcome to the Jewish Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm your host, Debbie Sasson. I went from being a financial advisor, author, and chronic under-earner to building my business to six figures as a financial planner and money mindset coach, and then onto multiple six figures as a full-time money and business coach. I help entrepreneurs create money-making businesses and build wealth using sales and money mindset strategies and in alignment with authentic Jewish values. Now, let's dive in to today's show. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the podcast. Before we jump into the interview that I'm going to share with you today, I think September is interview season because this is the second one in a row. But anyway, before we jump in, I want to wish all of my listeners a happy new year, Shana Tova. In just a few days from now, it's going to be Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. And I thank all of you so much for being here, for continuing to listen to the podcast every week. It has been an amazing year. I have accomplished so much in my business, and I think in one of my future episodes, I'm really going to break down what I did during the last year and what I learned during the last year. I've been journaling on it a little bit this week, not too much really, but I am sort of in awe of everything that I accomplished. And I invite you to do the same because so frequently we're looking up the mountain, how much more we have to go. And when you take 10 minutes, 20 minutes to take stock of everything that you have done, when you look back, you can be in awe of yourself. You can really be grateful that you keep moving forward in your business. You're expanding your capacity to do hard things, to ask for more money, receive more money, manage money in your business better. I know that even though there's more that you want to accomplish in this world, and maybe there were things that you wanted to accomplish in the last year and those didn't happen, let's focus and be grateful for and give ourselves a big, huge pat on the back for everything that we did accomplish, because I know that it was a lot. Let me now introduce you to Gila Ross. We have a fabulous discussion coming up for you today. Gila is a vibrant, positive, much-loved coach and educator with over 20 years of experience. Gila has a passion for sharing joy and relevance of Judaism and all of her positive parenting that she's learned over her years of being a positive parent. And Gila also is the host of the Power Up podcast. It was named the top Jewish podcast worldwide, and she shares weekly with her listeners her grand English humor. She's very witty, her wisdom, and her inspiration. And we are also in this podcast going to be talking about Gila's new book, Living Beautifully, How to Bring Joy, Meaning, and Love into Your Life. Gila's book is based on the timeless wisdom of Pirkei Avos, the ethics of the fathers. And I recently purchased Gila's book and started reading it, and it really is deep. It's in bite-sized snippets so that you can also enjoy and just soak up her wisdom and take action, right? We don't want to just be inspired, but we also want to implement and change the course of our lives. So I'll be sharing the link to Gila's book in the show notes. The Ross family, Gila and her husband, have an open, fun-filled home. They recently moved from Manchester in the UK to Denver, Colorado in the United States. And Gila also shares a little bit of her globetrotting adventures with our listeners for, she's been in so many places over the last 20 years. And her home, her husband, her children, it's a top destination for families who want to celebrate Shabbos and the Chagim, the Jewish holidays, and really just be inspired and, again, soak up that wisdom and joy that Judaism has to offer us. So without further ado, let's jump into this week's episode. I am really excited to share with you a guest today. Her name is Gila Ross. Gila is a coach and an educator with 20 years of experience, and she's the host of the Power Up podcast. Gila has recently written a book, and she's going to tell us all about her new book during the episode today. But let me just give you a little bit of a background. First of all, I think that Gila and I first got to know each other on Instagram, and she has a lot of inspiration and a lot of good English humor to share with all of her fans on Instagram. My husband's English, so I can say that. It's a little bit different from the American sense of humor, but Gila is on her way as we record this episode to the United States. So she's going to learn all about the difference between English and American humor. But in the meantime, Gila's book, Living Beautifully, shares with us how to bring joy, meaning, and love into our lives based on the timeless wisdom of Pirkei Avos, the ethics of the fathers. And you can find it now in all of your favorite Jewish bookstores. Gila's family is open and it's fun-filled, and it's a top destination for families wishing to celebrate Shabbos and the Chagim, now, of course, in Denver, no longer, unfortunately, in Manchester. So the Manchester community will have to wait till your return. Anyway, Gila, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
We've crossed paths in so many different venues. We've been on the Power Up for Pesach summit together and various other places. Right. And I'm so thrilled that we finally get to meet in person over Zoom. So why don't you share with me, because I know I don't really know that much about you, except that you're now in the United States almost. And that's my first stomping grounds, having grown up in Los Angeles. But tell me and tell all of my listeners a little bit about you and your background, how you got to be where you are today. Let us know you.
Thank you. So I grew up in London in the UK. And then shortly after we got married, I moved to Manchester. And the idea we were going to go to Israel, but my husband was finishing off Samicha. So we moved to Manchester for a few months while he finished off his Samicha. And we left there, and I thought, that's it, never coming back to Manchester again. And we then moved from there, we moved to Israel. While we were there, we did a leadership training course. It's called Ner LaElef. It was called Ner LaElef in those days. I don't think it's still around, definitely not under that name at all. And the idea basically was that it was a 2-year leadership training course. You did the course. Mm-hmm. It trained you how to take on a leadership position in a smaller Jewish community outside of Israel. And the commitment you made was that it was a 2-year course. You did the course for 2 years, and then you made a commitment to go to a community for 2 years. So we did that. We were very excited, my husband and I, both of us, to go and take on a leadership position in a smaller community. And coming towards the end of our 2 years, a position came up in Berlin, Germany. So as much as obviously the Holocaust affects all Jews, but it wasn't as personal for me as it was for my husband. For my husband, his grandmother was from Berlin, fled just before the war. So it was very, very personal for him. And the position there was, they were starting an outreach kollel there, and they were looking for couples to come out and work with community there. And we took that. We were there for 1.5 years, which was a really interesting, very, very interesting experience living in Berlin, Germany. And while we were there for about 1.5 years, and a friend of my husband mentioned to my husband that he knew that there was a place in Calgary, Canada, that were looking for a couple to come out and work with the community there. So we're both from UK. We heard of a Calgary, Canada. I'd never heard of it before. We Googled it. It's in
found
Canada.
It somewhere on the map.
Yeah, it's, you look at Toronto and Montreal, and it's just way, way, way past there. And we moved out there. It's an amazing Jewish community, very small, but very warm and, really incredible community. We were working there specifically with high school students, university students. And when we were there for about 4 years or so, our kids were getting a bit older. And because the religious Jewish community is so small, the infrastructure for our kids was getting too small for what our kids needed. So we're looking to move on, and a position opened up in Vancouver, Canada, which is also West Coast Canada.
You've been going further west, right?
Yes, we were going further west.
Okay. And I didn't realize you'd been all over the globe. Okay.
Well, not all over the globe. We haven't done the whole of Australia, Hong Kong, China, right? So we moved to Vancouver. We took on a position there. My husband took on NCSY there. I was working as the youth director for the Orthodox shul there. We were there for 6 years. My oldest was starting high school, and again, got to the point where we needed more than what the community had. So long story short, we ended up moving back to the UK. We moved to Manchester, and we I've been here for 6 years now. And just recently, a position opened up in Denver, in Colorado. And I mean, we've been speaking to them, I think, since beginning of the school year. And at first, it was like, nope, we're not moving. And then it was like, okay, maybe we are. By the time this comes out, we will, please God, have already be moving to Denver, Colorado, to work for the Jewish Experience there.
Amazing. So I'm going to actually just highlight one thing that you said, and that is because I'm going to bring this back to business, right? And we're going to talk about your book and how you became a coach and how you became an educator. Well, educator, we understand, but how you ended up writing your book. But you started speaking with the community in Denver close to a year ago. And at first it was impossible. No way,
Yeah.
we're not going. Our kids are of a certain age. They need a certain, education. So we're not going to go. And then over time, a little bit of an opening opened up and something that was impossible became possible. And then it became inevitable. And
Yes.
this is how I'm pointing this out to all of my entrepreneur listeners. We also have to think about our businesses because so often our mindset is such that we think about an income goal or enrolling clients, making money, even writing a book. You wrote a book. I've written a book. My husband is in the process of finishing up his book. It's going to be published by the same publisher, Mosaica, shout out, that published your book. They've already done 90% of the work. Anyway, it's a long journey, much longer than birthing a baby, but not raising them up. But anyway, something that one day you think it's impossible to make $5,000 in a month or $10,000 in a month or $100,000 in a year. And then all of a sudden you start to see a little bit of light, a little bit of possibility, and you keep taking steps forward. Like in your case, Gila, you kept having conversations and you thought about it, and maybe it wouldn't be so bad, and maybe we can find education for the children or whatever your considerations were. But it's the same way in business that when you take another step and another step forward, all of a sudden what was once impossible now becomes inevitable. And then when we speak next time and you're going to be on the other side of Atlantic, you're going to be in Denver and it will be a reality in your life. And that's exactly how we grow our businesses. That's how everything happens, is that it becomes ultimately the thing that you have created through your thoughts and through your actions.
And I think also for me, like, I could see this in so many journeys, right? Journey of the book as well was impossible. And here it is, right? But it's, for me, I find it gets to the point where I have to stop thinking, right? Because the more like I think about it and I think about it, and I think, if I take the example of the book, and I know that you've written a book, your husband's writing a book, right? There's so many steps to the process that I actually, when I was writing the book, there was parts of it that I deliberately, like, because not everyone knows this, but publishing a book is actually really, really, really expensive.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And right when I was actually writing my book, I realized that if I was going to reach out and find out how much it would cost to publish the book, I would stop writing because I would have that. It's impossible. It's impossible. And I
Right.
deliberately didn't reach out to the publisher. I mean, Mosaic had already excited to take the manuscript because they'd seen parts of it, but I didn't reach out to them to find out how much it was going to cost until the book was finished writing. Right. So sometimes you almost have to you have to push yourself too far in before you find out all the impossible bits, so that now it's like it's almost too late to give up, right?
Kind of like having a baby. Like once you're 8 months pregnant, it's a little bit late to turn back, right? You have to just
Yeah,
keep going.
yeah, exactly.
So we're going to focus on the book in a minute, but since I want to encourage other entrepreneurs, especially coaches who are listening in to the episode today, tell me a little bit about your journey as a coach. I know you work with, like more general life coaching and parenting and other relationship issues. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do in that role.
So I do a couple things. I do one-to-one. I work with clients one-to-one, and I also do group offerings, right? I do group work. So the one-to-one, the focus mainly on parenting and life coaching. And I do find that I have a passion for parenting relationships because, I've spent a lot of my life working for the Jewish community.
Mm-hmm.
And be honest, I like through all that time, I feel like the biggest impact we make on the world is the way we raise our kids.
Yep.
And that's really what fuels my passion for coaching, right? So most parents want to raise their kids well, right? And they also want to enjoy the process. And I think the two come hand in hand, right? The more we can enjoy the process of parenting, the easier it becomes and the better we get at it, right? So that's a big part of it. And I think part of also parenting is ourselves, right? Because when we are in a good space, right? When a person is feeling happy, fulfilled, confident, we show up differently for our kids. Like just think about like the difference of how we parent when we've like not had a good night's sleep and we haven't had a coffee. I mean, I don't talk to me before I have a coffee, right? So I'll use that as as an example, right? As opposed, and your kid asks you something, as opposed to when we have had a good night's sleep, we've sat down, we've had a coffee, we've even had breakfast, and then our kid asks us the same thing, right? Like, we don't parent in a vacuum. I guess the passion behind a lot of the one-to-one work that I do. And then the group work that I do is I have a course that's called Stuck to Success. And it really, what it does is it helps people set goals that are in alignment with themselves and achieve those goals. Learn how to motivate themselves when motivation fades, because it will fade at some point, and how to take everything in life kind of as feedback. So that's kind of the group course that I'm actually currently running at the moment. We're finishing up, which has been an incredible experience. And when you talk about it's happening, like that happened there as well, because we're in the midst of a move and our life is just crazy upheaval at the moment. And it was impossible to get a group together and to start this journey and to do this journey, but it's happened, right? And we're almost at the end of it. Like, so, and again, it kind of comes from like that, for me anyway, it comes from like that, making that decision, it's going to happen. And I'm not going to think about it, right? Because if I think about like, is it possible? Is it not possible? Then it's thing. And if I can share, like, I think one of the big things that helps me deal with that impossibility thing is when we take sort of failure off the table, right? When life becomes about either winning or learning, right? So
Correct.
like I remember back when I was like thinking of or just starting writing the book, and I was like, I don't know if it's good. And she's like, what's the worst that can happen? And I thought, and I was like, well, the worst that can happen is that at that point I thought, I'd write the book and whatever, like, so I would waste some time, right? Like, that time's gonna pass anyway, right? So it's kind of, if if we can sort of take that like failure, that seriousness around like if it's gonna work, it's worth like what's the worst that can happen, right? So I'll put it out there, and the group won't happen.
So
Yeah,
what? You just learn from the
you learn.
experience.
Yeah, and you can still learn from that experience. So that's I think something that really kind of helps me in my journey is kind of like to firstly not think about it so much, because if I do think about it and it's like, oh my goodness, I'm going to get a group, I'm not going to get a group, right? Like, I don't know, right? And also like, okay, what's the worst that can happen? I'll put it out there. We still learn something from the process, right? We learn something from the marketing, like what sort of marketing works and what doesn't work, right? And I happen to love, I've got a background in psychology, my degree's in psychology, and I love the research type of things. And I find that when you apply it to business, it's fascinating, right? Like, you put something out on social media and I don't know what's going to work, what's not going to work. And like sometimes, you put something out and like it just resonates and you're like, wow, right? And you put
And
something
you just
out
thought
there.
it was something that it was like, it was just a quick thought that you had coming out of the shower, when all of our best thoughts, by the way, happen. But, and it takes off and then something else lands like a thud.
Yeah, yeah. And you kind of learn. This is what people are
Exactly.
struggling with. This is what people aren't struggling with. We learn, I think, how to up our game better, how to serve the people better, right? So that, okay, if this is what people are looking for, then this is what I can offer to help that.
There are two things that I want to talk about. We're on the entrepreneurial journey at the moment, so we're going to stay here. But I want to go back, remind me, and speak something specifically about parenting that you probably didn't expect, but we'll get there. So
Okay.
I'm leaving that out there as a little curious wisdom. Remind me. But since we're talking about business and putting things out there and learning and marketing, and there is so much trial and error in business, and you really have to be in it for the game, really the game of the trial and the error and enjoying it. And there are definitely days that I feel like throwing my laptop out the window, and it might not be at 8 o'clock in the morning. It might be after something happens at 10 or 11 in the morning. It'll be like, the frustration is real. But that is also part of how we learn, as you said, and grow as entrepreneurs and as business owners. And the point that you made about not overthinking, because we can just get so lost in the cobwebs of our mind if we get stuck overthinking and trying to perfect ahead of time. But just as you said, putting something out there, seeing what happens is so, so clear. But what I want to go to now, because I love talking about money and business, is really you coming from psychology background, education, serving the community. We have a lot of thoughts out there. Maybe it's other people's thoughts, maybe it's part of our own thoughts or teaching, and treating our own community well and supporting the community with chesed, with kindness. But let's talk about money and charging for the coaching that you do and charging for the group coaching that you do, and your relationship with money. How has that grown and changed during your 20 years of being a coach and an educator?
If I can be really honest about this, right? Because also my background is I started off in the nonprofit world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where I give and I give and I give, and you don't sort of charge for anything. And even if people are paying, they're paying like a fraction of what the value is for it. So the money journey is been absolutely massive for me. And it's one that I'm still working on, right? Like 100% still working on. And the other thing for me is that money is not my greatest motivator, right? Like for some
Okay.
people, their goal is I need to make money, I need to whatever. For me, I've learned over my journey that because I have a bit more of a complicated relationship with money, money has to be one of the pieces of it, right? So what's my motivation? My motivation is, yes, absolutely money, right? But it's also service, making an impact, helping people, right? So there's all those different pieces. And I think regardless of where someone's relationship with money is, I think that's a valid idea to have, because there are going to be months where you make more money and there are going to be months where you make less money. And there are going to be, offerings that you put out that you think are amazing and don't make you the money goals that you want, but might give you other, right? So it's important, I think, for me, definitely it's been very, very important to have many indicators of success, right?
Okay.
So if I put something out and, like even social media, which is all I'm putting out for free pretty much, right?
Yep.
And, if I'm putting that out and that's helping someone, even if I'm not making money, then that to me is already a success. And I also find that the thing with business, and especially the way I run my business, is it's very hard to pinpoint what it is that leads to the money, right? Because, for example, if someone's following me on social media for a year, right, or
Okay.
2 years, and then they reach out for coaching, right, like, for the 2 years that I'm offering value for free, like I'm not going to necessarily see that. And I'm not necessarily going to say, okay, this post is what made them do that. Because it's not like that, right? Because there's the people build, especially in the coaching world, they work with the people that they build up a relationship with, right? And relationships
100%.
take time. Did I answer that question though? Or where
A
were we
little
at?
bit. Well, I might try to pin you
Oh,
down a little bit, but I
yeah,
also
put
I
me
also
down a
want to
little bit more.
highlight that sometimes relationships take time and sometimes they don't.
Yes.
Because sometimes I've had clients decide to work with me one-on-one or in my group coaching containers that were very, very new to me. They saw something, it resonated. They had been thinking about getting some business coaching. So they saw something that I put out. I have a client who heard a podcast and very quickly signed up to work with me. And there are other times that there are clients who've been in my funnel, as we call it in the business world, who have been in my orbit. They've been following me, stalking me for 2 years, and then they will decide to sign up and work with me. So it can work both ways. I don't want it to be a thought error that people just adopt that it takes time, because sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. And I'm the same way. Sometimes I'll see someone, I'll see a post, I'll stalk them for a few days, binge their content and be like, yeah, that's what I want right now. And I will go and I'll hire that person for something that is just something that I notice is missing in my business at that time. So it can go either way. But I think on average, people will need to see some content, even if they binge it for a day or two, you know, more than just like they see you once and then they're in. It's not like you're, thirsty on a hot summer day and just go grab a bottle of water. It's not as generic as that. But let's just go back to what you were
Yeah,
talking
and can
about
I
in
just
terms of
add
yeah,
something onto that? Because you're 100% right, and I've also experienced that, right? And like, like I've been, let's say, for example, Power Up for Pesach or other series, and like from there, I'll get clients. But even that piece of being invited onto that Power Up for Pesach has been a process, right?
correct. Yes.
I think a bit of my pet peeve about if you look at some of the marketing in this world is that the overnight successes, and I just don't think it's fair for people that are starting out to have that expectation that it's going to be an overnight, right? Because it takes time to build up an audience. It takes time to find your groove, right? It takes time. It doesn't mean that you're going to go from you're going to be sitting at zero for a long time, but if you look at the people that you follow, their journeys have probably been longer than you can kind of see on it. But absolutely, yes, once
100%.
you build that up, and it's kind of that it takes time to build a momentum, right? And you have to keep turning the wheel, but you get to a certain point, and then you've got the momentum, and it's easier,
And the
right?
wheel takes off. Right. I get it.
And the wheel takes off, and you can't skip that beginning part of turning the
100%.
wheel, right?
100%. I look at it in terms of investing money, and you keep investing like $100 every single month. And it looks like there's very little happening to your investment. But at some point, the curve starts like there's like an inflection in the curve, and all of a sudden, the compound interest takes off. And the amount that you've put in equals the interest that you've earned. And then all of the interest that you've earned, or the return on investment, then is multiples of what you have invested in your, whether you call it your S&P 500 stock fund or something like that. That's just the way investing works, is that compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. Anyway, so sometimes people do bounce around the bottom, whatever that is, like near zero income. And that can be $1,000 a year, or $2,000, 3,000, that can actually happen for multiple years because of the overthinking, the fear, the doubts, the worries, the fear of failure that we talked about, or because they just haven't gotten that momentum. They haven't figured it out yet. So even if somebody's listening to this podcast and you've been trying to grow your business for a number of years, don't let the number of years you've been in business be the thing that deters you from continuing to move forward. It could be that you need to have a job with some other income along the way while you're building your business. But if you have something valuable to share with the world, I absolutely believe that you can make it happen. So let's go back again, because you said your relationship with money is complicated. Now, several podcasts ago, I talked about when I left my job at the Bank of Israel. I first had worked on Wall Street, moved to Israel, worked as a portfolio manager and an economist at the Bank of Israel. Then I opened up a financial planning business. And my first client, when I do the math from shekels to dollars, I earned $25 an hour, which
Right.
is laughable for someone who was managing multi-billion-dollar portfolios. But we all start at the bottom, and I had no mentor guiding me on what the value of the work is that I did at the time. And it took me a while before I got up the courage to raise my price and raise, etc. So I'm just curious, where did you start out when you were also in your business?
So definitely way undercharging,
Okay.
and definitely the fear of charging. And I feel like sometimes what holds me back is that, like, I want to help people, right? And so right, like I feel like, oh my goodness, if I'm going to charge too much, maybe they're not going to be able to, right? Like all
Right.
those things, like it's the fear of charging and the fear of, and I think there is a tiny element of good in it. It's mostly bad, the truth is, right? It's mostly a hindrance. The tiny element of good in it is that I think when, and especially if I'm comparing it to the work in the non-profit to the work in the profit, when you work for someone, right, and you're charging, you want to make sure that the value you're giving, right? But the truth is, like, if I think about what I charge and I think about the value that I give, like, I really struggle to charge enough, right? And I do over give value, and
We're
even
going
in my
to have a talk off the record about that. Okay.
yeah, even in my course, right, like that I'm running at the moment, and I'm thinking to myself, like, I went through this whole process and I toned it down because I was like, look, for what I'm charging, this is way too much value. And now that I've run the program, I'm giving it, and I'm like, crazy, right? You're giving and you're giving
Mm-hmm.
so much. I've got nothing against the over giving. It's the undercharging that I think
Right.
is for me a hindrance. And it is something that I have to kind of, work through and be able to be confident that, yeah, this is, look, it is. when you have that confidence to say, look, this is what it's going to be, then it's easier to charge. So that's my struggle, is to kind of say, like, to that I do undercharge for what I offer.
So I'm going to
Yeah.
give you a couple of tips, and anybody who's listening, is number one is you doing your work first, like really loving your offer, like whatever it is, if it's an 8-week group coaching program, if it's a 3-month one-on-one coaching program, if you're a copywriter, if you're a website designer, photographer, anybody listening in, right? Do your own work about why you love your offer. And then think about what you're charging and what the value is to your client over the lifetime of them using your tools. Like if we think about parenting relationships, right? And if you have a child who's not succeeding in school, or if you have a child who you're fighting with them all the time, whatever it is, like your relationship with that child is going to impact them and affect them for the next 60, 70, 80 years of their life, right? So if you're going to be charging £100 an hour, or if you're going to be charging, £500 to come to an 8-week coaching program, like it's going to be a huge transformational piece of somebody's life for decades. You'll never be able to charge them enough. And you just understanding and feeling how much of a no-brainer it is, and also what you save them down the road when you can change the way you're showing up in parenting, and even your reactivity with regards to your kids, right? I'm a mom of 8. My youngest, thank the Lord, is now 16. And so we're almost done with teens. I only have 2 teenagers left. Right. But when you can like calm down your reactivity, and I don't want anybody on this podcast to think that I'm so brilliant at it. I'm just happy that I'm near the end of it. Now I just get to be the grandma, the bubby. And so it's just give them cookies and cakes and hugs and things like that. And it's all good. But really you're changing people's lives, and you could never, ever charge enough about that. So that's number one, is really, or number two, loving your offer, really, really understanding how the work that you're doing is helping someone change their future. And even if you look 2 or 5 years out, right, you're already making an impact. And then the third piece that I want to address is your willingness to raise your prices so that you're not undercharging is a willingness to be uncomfortable. It's not that you have an undercharging issue, you have an underfeeling issue. You're not willing to feel uncomfortable doubling your prices and getting those words out of your mouth. When you're more willing to be uncomfortable because you've already done your work ahead of time and you appreciate the long-term value of what you're giving people, and you're willing to hear no until it rolls off your tongue smoothly that this is what I now charge, that's when you charge more money and earn more money and you receive more money. So, but you have to be willing to feel more uncomfortable.
I like that.
Let's go back to parenting. And this is a question that popped into my mind because number one, you guys spent time in Berlin, in Germany, and your husband's grandmother is from Berlin. So all 4 of my grandparents were from Germany. My dad was born in Germany. My dad should live and be well to 120. He's 85. And then they all fled from Nazi Germany. And I think from my point of view, the way that I see the world is that so much of our relationship with money in particular, because that's what I talk about, but so much of who we are and how we show up in the world, so much of it is informed by the Holocaust. First of all, just in terms of just the general, where we are today, how Israel was established after the Holocaust. But leaving that aside, I think that so many of us have living inside of us generational trauma from the Holocaust. Now, like I wasn't born there, but I definitely know that the fear, the scarcity, the deprivation, the lack of money, the lack of resources, because all 4 of my grandparents left everything behind and then had to reestablish themselves in the United States, that definitely shows up for me. And also the fact that German parenting, European parenting is a little bit different from American parenting. And what was okay back in the old country isn't what goes in 2023. But tell me a little bit about how, if that old school way of parenting, or even some of the trauma from the Holocaust, is impacting some of the people that you work with.
It's a very, very interesting question. And I want to touch on the scarcity piece.
Okay.
Because I think the scarcity piece, the scarcity mindset is massive. And it's not just money, right? The way I see it show up in parenting is people who feel like, I don't have enough time, I don't have enough patience, I don't have enough whatever, right? And I think one of the massive pieces, mindset pieces we can do for ourselves and in our parenting is to recognize that we are exactly what our kids need. I remember even in my own parenting journey, right? My oldest is almost 19, right? My youngest is just 3, right? So even in my own parenting journey, like when I get into that mindset of understanding that I am what this child needs, and from a Jewish perspective, we know that God's, just like you have a marriage partnership, God gives every child the parent they need and every parent the child they need, right? So that, when we can switch from that child is pushing my buttons to, hey, this child is given to me so that I can grow myself and I have what I need to meet this child's needs and to grow myself, then we can parent so differently. And it doesn't mean that we don't have to reach out for help. And it doesn't mean that we don't have to keep educating ourselves. And it doesn't mean that we don't have to work ourselves. Like, I'm a massive, massive proponent of doing what you can to make it easier. But that mindset switch, and it's a confidence, right? Parenting from the core kind of thing, right? Like where you can parent from a place of like, I have exactly what I need for this child. Right. So yeah, I might have to read a parenting book, or I might have to work with a coach, or I might have to, get a babysitter, or I might have to do whatever it is, but I have what I need. So I think that fear, that scarcity mindset so shows up in parenting, and it shows up financially as well. I mean, I work with parents who, kids have needs, right? And that, they're concerned about how to meet those needs financially, etc. But also in a massive way, it shows up in ourselves, right? When we feel like, I'm not a good enough parent, or I don't have enough time, I don't have enough energy, right? Like, why do I have so much day left at the end of my energy, right? But to recognize that you have exactly what you need for this child. And I think, we talk about generational trauma. There's generational resilience that we've also, right? The flip side of it as
I
well,
love it.
that we can tap into and we can build on, right? Because we're here, which means that if we're carrying that generational trauma, it means that someone in the past survived so that we're here. I don't want to minimize the work that we have to do, right? Because there is that work. But when a person has the confidence and the hope that they can do it, it's a game
Okay.
changer. Massive, massive part of parenting, I think, is healing our own traumas, right? And our own childhood triggers, because so much of what our kids do triggers us, right?
Oh
So,
boy.
right? Like, and very often you see this in a family, right? Where if there's both parents, right? Different children will trigger different parents, right? Why,
Mhm.
right? One parent will be like totally fine with that kid, and one parent will like, that kid drives them crazy. Why? Because there's different triggers, right? That each
That's
parent has
right.
different triggers, and the kids trigger those things. So it doesn't mean we don't have to, right? Do the work, right? Go through the healing, reach out for the help, right? Do whatever you have to do, look after yourself, all those types of things. But I think the prerequisite is knowing that we can. Right. And it's also, again, it's very similar to the business side of things as
Exactly.
well,
From
right? Like,
impossible to inevitable. Like we can, right? Just being
yeah,
of that mindset that it is possible.
I think there's a lot of fear in parenting today. The world has changed and how we parent has changed, and it's a good thing, right? We are much more aware nowadays of the impact of parenting. A lot of us are recognizing how the way we were parented has impacted us, right?
Hmm.
And I think that has changed how we parent our children, and it's got both its positives and it's got its drawbacks, right? It's got its positives because I think hopefully we are going to do a much better job of bringing up the next generation
Okay.
than we were brought up. Hopefully they will be brought up with a lot less trauma than we were brought up with. The challenge is that there's a lot of fear as well, which undermines our confidence in parenting, which can set parents back as well, right? There's one of the big things, right, in parenting is that recognizing that we are going to fail. We are going to mess up our kids, right? It's just, there's no,
Inevitable. Back to inevitable.
it's inevitable, right? It's inevitable. It's impossible to be a perfect parent, right? And the trick is, and there's a ton of research on this, that shows that the trick is in how we respond to those mistakes that we make, right? There's an incredible amount of healing and repair that we can offer our kids and we can do for our relationship with our kids when we take that pressure off ourselves to be those perfect parents, right? When we, sort of let go of some of that fear that like we're going to mess our kids up, right? When we kind of can say, yeah, we will. But let me learn the tools of how to repair those ruptures that we're going to make in our relationship, or those ruptures that we're going to make for our kids.
Beautiful. So tell me a little bit about your book. Let's just come full circle and tell us about Living Beautifully. How did it come to pass? How did you decide that this is the book that needed to be published? And what is it about?
It's also a story on its own. So the story kind of started it started a bit back, but I'll start from during lockdown. So we went during lockdown, a lot of the women that I was teaching were mums, right? And we were all home with our kids working. It was just insanity. And yet, like, people were like, it was absolute insanity. And yet we were all craving connection. One of the things that I recognize is that a lot of people want to study Torah, but they don't necessarily have the times, the skills, the resources to pick a book of the Chumash or whatever off the thing and just read it. So I said, let's start a project. We'll go through Pirkei Avot, which is ethics of the fathers. It's part of the mission of the oral law that I personally absolutely love because it's so relatable. It's so relatable, right?
Yeah.
Like so many of the things that we have discussed here, you'll find in the book, right? Like, the whether something's possible or not possible, right? All these things, right? It's so relatable to our lives. And I said I will release 2 episodes on my podcast, up to 15 minutes a week. So each one was about 5 to 7 minutes. And we'll go through the whole of Pirkei Avot, right? And my focus was very much on understanding how it can relate to our lives today. So we did that. At first I thought it was going to take 6 months. It actually took 9 months. And we did the entire thing. And then when it was finished, someone asked me, that's great. So, like I mentioned to someone that I finished the whole Pirkei Avot on podcast, and someone said to me, what's next? And at the time I had notes written because every time I researched before I published the episodes, I had it all in notes. And I said, in my spare time, I'd love to, write a book on it. And the person said to me, sounds great, but books are really hard to sell.
Yes, they are.
And I kind of just, whatever, right? I let it go. Then I can't remember if I remember, I think what happened is I was like once jogging and this idea came into my head, I should write a book. So I reached out to Mosaic Press and I kind of said like, just reach out to them. And they sent me an email right away, basically saying, we'd love to work with you. I was in touch with Rabbi Kornbluth, who's one of the founders of Mosaic Press, and we were discussing different things. And then I kind of told him, look, I've got a couple of different ideas for books. Or I could do I've got this whole series on Pirkei Avot, on ethics of the fathers on my podcast. What do you think about that? And he's like, it's amazing, do it, right? And I believe my 16-year-old also said that to me, like, put that into a book. So I was like, okay, fine. And he says, write a few chapters and then send it to me. So I wrote a few chapters, I sent it to him. He was like, it's great, keep writing. And meanwhile, we met with him and he told us, the different options. So at the time, this was about 2 years ago, there were different options, right? Either we could raise the money and then I owned, a percentage of the rights to the book, or he told me, and I was the fundraising part, the raising that money intimidated me. So I was like, what if I can't raise that money? And he says, look, it might be possible that we could underwrite the cost, but then the book 100% belongs to us. We don't recommend you do it. But in the back of my head, that was it. So meanwhile, I reached out to someone to help me fund this, and they said, look, we love what you do. We love your podcast. We love your social media. We love the digital things. We're not into books. We think the world has moved past that. Like, that's not something that we planned. And I got so gutted at that no that I actually stopped writing for about 6 months.
Wow.
And I don't think it was a conscious decision. It was just like, wow, it just felt like so deflating. And I just like
all
stopped.
because of money, right? All because of money. See?
All because of money. Yep. All because of money. I'm sure you know this, but like, it's not just money. It's how we tie our self-worth into money and all that, right?
100%, right? It's like This teeny
Exactly.
tiny slice of the universe that somebody spoke, right? There's 8 billion people on the planet, 15 million Jews on the planet. They spoke with 2.5 people and came back with, nope, I can't get you the money. And you stopped for 6 months. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. Again, what they were saying no to was they don't believe in books, right? They believe in the digital world, right? And everyone has their different things, right? So it's
Exactly.
then the summer of last year I picked it up again. And this was the time where I made that decision. I said to myself, I knew costs had risen, and I wasn't sure if they would still have that offer to underwrite the cost if I couldn't raise the money. But I said, I'm not asking them either of those questions. I'm not asking them how much it's going to cost. I'm not asking them if I can't raise the money, what then? I'm going to finish writing. I sent it in, and they loved it. They said, okay, let's get on a meeting. Whatever, on the meeting, they basically told us that I was right, that the cost had risen to double. And they said, we don't do it for anyone anymore. We don't underwrite the cost because we can't afford to put that sort of money down. So they said, we can't afford to put that money down because if you think about the publishing house, they're going to put all that money in and they only get their investment back a couple of years down the line because the whole book processing part of it and publishing and selling and all that takes
It's
a
a
year plus,
long runway.
a
Yep.
long process. So it was kind of like, what now? And he said, look, it's a great book and go out and find people that want to dedicate it for someone that they love. And again, it was intimidating beyond that part of it. But I have to say, and
Resilience. You grew your
yeah,
resilience.
you said about the inner work of the why. When I had to reach out to people and set up meetings, I had to reach into why, right?
Mm.
Why do I want to do this, right? Why do I feel this book is so important? And it lit that fire again in me, right? That was like, you know what? The reason why I think it's so important to have this book is because the world needs it, right? We need, like, I think what's unique about my book is that number one, it's very easy to read. It's very short chapters, so people can flip through it and just take a little bit of inspiration. So many of us we're so stretched for time, and yet we do need that inspiration, that motivation, whatever it is. And I had to dig into myself and kind of like remember the why. And it was amazing to connect with people that also wanted that why. So it ended up being, it was a very intimidating process for me, but it was actually, I really liked that process. And thank God we got people that dedicated it for different people. We signed a contract with them. That was about August, September last year. Working with this publisher, they were amazing. Like they really took this manuscript and my editor was amazing. Like he fact checked everything. And then the second editing and the proofreading and the typesetting and the cover design, like they really took it and made it into a product that is incredible. I think by the time this podcast is out, it will have already come out. But because we were in the process of moving, I managed to get 100 out to the UK, just early edition kind of things before they hit the bookshops. Because the way it works is it goes from Israel to America and then distributed from America. Right. So I
Uh-huh.
managed to get sold out that first lot within a week, which was
Amazing.
absolutely amazing. I mean, like,
Congratulations.
yeah, like oversold. Like I already have a wait list for people who are like, when's the next lot coming? So it's been an incredible journey.
All right. Well, we're going to put all of the details in the show notes for Living Beautifully from Mosaica Press. That was written by Gila Ross. So, Gila, in summing up, let's just go back and talk about a few things that we mentioned today. And one of them is in terms of writing a book, parenting your children, changing your relationship with yourself, building a business. I mean, I think it's really the thread that underlines everything that we've talked about is that so often when we start something, the initial thought in our mind, the initial reaction is going to be, oh no, it's impossible. It can't be, or maybe for everybody else, but not for me, right? It's not going to happen. And we might be reacting to things that happened previously in our life, maybe our parenting, maybe it can be inherited traumas, but there's going to be an initial reaction or trigger oftentimes. And we have to expand our mind a little bit that maybe what comes up first isn't the truth. This might be, you might call it a test. It might be, some sort of challenge that you're here to overcome. But if we can just sort of like open and expand our horizons a little bit and look for just little shards of light that are coming through and start to see evidence of possibility. Well, if somebody else wrote a book, maybe it's possible for me. Oh, if they change their relationships with their kids, maybe I can do it too. If they were able to grow a business, right? If they can have one-on-one coaching clients, they can run a group coaching program. If they can raise their prices, right? If they can find people who are going to donate to their book. I know that when I published my book, I ran a Kickstarter campaign. So I really had to do a lot of legwork also to get people to, fund my book. I managed, thank God, in the end. So I didn't have to underwrite that from my bank account. But if we just expand our mind, and then we have to expand our inner resilience, our, even believing what's possible, and we grow so much, like you said correctly, we're either winning or we're learning. You said a little bit with parenting, we're going to fail, but we're going to learn when we actually look at what happened that time that you yelled at the kids, the time that the laundry wasn't done and your kids are wearing the same, pair of pants or trousers for 3 days in a row. Never happened in my house. Yes, it did. But anyway, right. We just learn from the experience. Sometimes we have to be more organized, or sometimes we just have to buy them more clothing because they just don't have enough. And God bless those children. They just keep growing. But really, we can go from impossible to possible to inevitable to getting the thing done. And that's really the message of this podcast episode. And when we do that, we can live beautifully. So there you go. We can bring it back to the book, because that's really what God wants us to do in this life, is to grow. It's not going to sit here and just, it would be lovely to go to the beach. It's summertime in Israel. It's very hot. Go and enjoy the water and the waves. But that's not really what we're here to do, 365 days a year. So thank you so much for spending this time with me. By the time this is released, you will be safely in Denver, God willing. But I'm going to wish you a very smooth move, easy transition. All of your boxes and suitcases and everything else should arrive on time, so that the upheaval is minimized, because it's always an upheaval, and the community should welcome you with open arms.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And I guess because of when this is released, it's going to be the new year. So we're just going to wish all of our listeners that they should be inscribed and sealed in the Book of Life. K'tiva v'chatima tova to all of our Jewish listeners. And thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
Thanks for listening to the Jewish Entrepreneur Podcast. If you want to stop underselling and under-earning and close more sales, you need to clear the limiting money beliefs that are sabotaging your business growth. Head on over to debbiesasson.com/mindset and download my free Money Mindset Workbook. Uncover and dissolve money blocks like hundreds of other entrepreneurs who are now building 6, multi-6, and 7-figure businesses and creating true financial freedom.